Speaker Prieto, Majority Leader Greenwald, thank you for speaking with New Jersey. Tomorrow the governor will give his budget address. And both of you have been former chairs of the budget committee. What do you expect from the governor, and what would you like to hear from the governor? Start with the speaker.
Well, I actually, as former budget chairman, we sort of understand and get the budget. Obviously, we don't get a lot of information from this administration until like the morning of, and we won't know what's really in the budget. The one thing that hopefully our revenue projections look like they've been somewhat on target, so that's, I guess, a good point. What I would like to hear in this budget is to make sure that we are protecting working families, that those programs that help these families as a safety net, that actually in my life I've used them to make sure they're there, sort of like, tuition aid grants, Medicaid, and different things for housing, rental assistance. All these things are things that I'm focused to make sure that are in the budget and stay in the budget. So budgeting is about priorities, so we have to figure out what those are. And we'll see what his ideas are coming into the budget. And I guess it's a proposed budget. We'll see what his revenue projections will be also, and then we'll start work from there.
Assemblyman Greenwald, the elephant in the room as far as the budget is concerned is the payment of the pension obligations. What's your position on that?
Well, I think the Speaker said it very well. The budget's about priorities, and part of the priorities is living up to your obligations and your promises. The pension is an obligation. It's also a promise. It's one of the things that the governor has touted on his national tour as one of his great successes. When the nation starts to look more closely and realize that he broke that promise and he did not make those payments, and that the Speaker and myself and our colleagues in the Senate made very difficult choices to make sure that that payment could be made last year, as difficult as it was, as the hardship that it was on the budget, it's a priority that has to get paid. And when you don't make that payment, as budget chairman, we know the impact on the overall budget, the impact on the financial institutions, the downgrading of our financial grade, which has been downgraded 7 times, which is a historic number in New Jersey, has an overall impact on the priorities that we as elected officials need to respond to our constituencies. And what I would like to hear him say tomorrow, and I think here's where I give him credit. We have been pushing for the first number of years of his administration that his numbers be realistic. This year's budget actually does seem to be coming in on par, because when we chaired the budget committee and when we had Democratic governors, we aligned our budget within 0.5% of the numbers that came in from OLS. We took a very conservative approach and wanted to make sure that the Office of Legislative Services married the numbers that we were looking at, because that allowed us to outline the priorities in the budget and make sure that at the end of the year you didn't have devastating cuts on programs. The governor needs to be realistic with the people. We're facing significant problems, and he needs to be realistic on the numbers and talk in a realistic way about the problems New Jersey faces.
Under the Christie administration, the state's bond rating has been downgraded, I think, about 8 times. How important is that, and what can we do to reverse that trend?
Well, and actually it has been in 5 years 8 times, and that's very detrimental for our bonding capacity, and that actually means it costs the residents more money every time we borrow money. So it's very important for us to be on target and meet our obligations, and every time we don't meet those pension payments, that becomes a problem. Now, we've been working on a bill with the budget chairman to look at budgeting, as what we're talking about here today, as for the future, something beyond what the year you're doing, looking at maybe the next 2 years, something non-bonding, but looking at what those revenues and what those expenditures could be, and also having some consensus on revenue projection, both from the administration and the OLS, so that way we can have some ideas, and then put something in there that it would be a contingency plan if we do not make the expectations, something at least at minimum 3%, something tangible that we can use if things go wrong, because our surplus in the last few years has been minimal. It's been less than 1%, and that's not acceptable, and that's why the wheels came off the bus last year, and then suddenly who takes a hit? The pension payments. And guess what? The state of New Jersey takes a hit because of the downgrading. So it's a lose-lose situation for everybody. So we have to start being mindful how we do our budgeting and keep our obligations. And like I said, if you have a bad year, that doesn't mean you scrap everything. You need to figure it out and move forward. And as the majority leader said, these are things that were negotiated by people, including the pensions. We adjusted them. We made an agreement. You have to live up to that agreement. You can't say it was the best thing since sliced bread and then suddenly now things are no good. We need to do it again. You need to start, owning up to what you do.
Another critical issue that's facing the people of New Jersey is the crumbling infrastructure, our bridges, our roads. The Republicans have tied an increase to the gasoline tax to some relief on what they're calling a death tax. Are those two going to be tied together, or will we have a clean bill to increase the gasoline tax, or is there some other solution?
I've been talking about, our road infrastructure since I became the speaker. This is something from sitting on transportation for over 8 years. It's very important to us. New Jersey is a corridor state. It's monumental that we have our transportation trust fund in place to do our road infrastructure. I've been talking about the dirty word, the T word, since the beginning, and now the conversations have began, whether it's an estate tax, and those are conversations that we have ongoing, and the majority leader actually and I have been really advocating for some type of consensus on what can we do to fix this. It needs to be a net positive, so obviously the residents of New Jersey are the winners here. We have to dedicate our transportation trust fund money so that way we can not take that money. But I also see where we need to get better. And the inheritance tax, I think, is something that we'll look at. But again, it has to be something coupled and it has to be real. And I think everybody has to have skin in the game. So it doesn't have to be only the Democrats voting for this. Everybody should be voting for this because we are taxing our residents, but just our future residents. And we're kicking the can down the road. And $1.2 billion that come into the Transportation Trust Fund is going every penny after June. Is going to pay down debt. So I think we need to work on something.
Look, this is a very important issue, and I think the Speaker and I want to be very clear on this. You've outlined the question, I think, very appropriately. The Republican Party seems to be looking for a trade-off of what they call death tax for a transportation trust fund. Those are two public policy issues that have no correlation to each other. That being said, we have been talking for a number of years about how the estate inheritance tax impacts New Jersey families that earns their retirement and their estate is somewhere worth between $600,000 and $700,000. Those aren't the richest of New Jerseyans. Those are middle-class families. And we see those middle-class families every day starting to relocate out of the state of New Jersey. So we are absolutely committed and willing to have a conversation about looking at that tax and looking at both sides of the ledger, how many families we lose, what the impact on that number is to the overall budget. But set that aside for a second. The Republicans are talking about, and have not really been very open at all, about the need for how we're going to pay for a long-term infrastructure program. And this is what the Speaker and I are committed to on Transportation Trust Fund. This is a problem that's been broken. It has to get fixed. This governor has ignored it. He has robbed Peter to pay Paul. He took money from the tunnel project and used that to fund Transportation Trust Fund. What we want is a long-term, stable, sustainable transportation trust fund that the markets in New York, the lending institutions, and the business community as a whole can rely on. We don't want a 3-year program that gets us to the end of this governor's term. We need a long-standing program that gets us into the future of New Jersey, because that's when you ask the question, what will stop those downgrades? The financial markets want sustainability and predictability. When businesses look to relocate to New Jersey, they want sustainability and predictability. And that's a program that we presented to the governor's office, and so far has been rejected.
Also in the area of transportation, the New Jersey and New York legislatures are working to override the governor's veto on the Port Authority reforms. The authority has said they can clean house without any new regulations. Where do we go from here?
Well, I think that, it originated in New Jersey in the Senate. So the Senate, I think, is the one that's going to try to do the override. We have not had success. The way I look at it, it took a lot from to work with both sides of the river, 2 legislatures, to get a bill. So I commend the sponsors for working together. And we had gotten these common sense approach legislation to reforms for transparency in place. I think they should have been signed, and this would have been the starting point. Anything in addition to could have been added to. So I think that all those recommendations would have fell within these guidelines, and we could have augmented that. So I think it was kind of foolish with all the work that went into it. At at the end of the game, almost they decided to veto it. We'll go both governors. So I think there is something that needs to be done. I think to try and override it would be the right thing to do. Now, obviously, it'll have to go back in New York because their session ended. So they'll have to start all over again, which is unfortunate with all the hard work that went into it. But we'll see what time tells us.
This legislation called for nothing more than transparency. The governor's veto of this legislation is basically asking the fox to watch the hen house. Without the transparency, this authority has run amok. They have abused their power. It has been the subject of internal investigations. The legislature of both houses in both states have passed this legislation. The Republican members of New Jersey's legislation need to stand up once, just once, and stand up to the governor on something that they have voted for, understand was the right thing to do in transparency, and send a signal to this governor that his actions in vetoing this is a slap in the face to New Jersey residents, and they need to override the veto.
Switching gears to education, Speaker, would you care to comment on the students' occupation of Cam Anderson's office in Newark?
You know, that is sort of I guess is more at the local level, and I think there's some they're not very happy there with what's going on. Obviously, the governor makes that decision to reappoint, and it's a state takeover district. That's, you know, it's something that we shouldn't be there. We should be able to have, you know, good school systems in Newark, and there's no reason to have these issues at this point in time. And I think that it's unfortunate, you know, for education as a whole.
Later today, you're going to take up some bills on park testing. Your position on that?
Well, I think it's important for us to sort of take a step back and seeing how these tests work out. Because once you start making these tests weigh to a certain amount on each of the students, it comes to my mind that now the teachers only start teaching to make sure that they pass these tests, whether it's for how you're assessing the student or how the teacher is being assessed. It becomes problematic. And I think once you start doing that, I think it's not good for the teacher, and the one that it's not good for is the student. You want to be able to give them an environment that they're able to learn and something they're going to take out there. If you're teaching just to a test, I think that's unfortunate. So I think we need to see the implementation of this, that we sort of like slow it down. And I think these bills are good bills that I think hopefully will be successful passing today.
Question about South Jersey and specifically Atlantic City. Assemblyman Greenwald, what does the future hold in store for Atlantic City, and what would you like to see Trenton do to help that city?
Listen, I'm very pleased that my friend Speaker Prieto is on a review committee to help address that city. I think what Atlantic City needs to be separated out from what has historically been a north-south divide and be looked at as an opportunity for a great American success story. Atlantic City is a gaming city. It needs to become a city with gaming. I think it is a city that has a remarkable opportunity to turn around. It has a God-given natural asset in the Atlantic City Ocean. It is an ocean and a tourism destination that has not been utilized, I think, because of the poor planning that has gone in the city for decades. I would break the city down in the quarters. I would focus on a gaming district. I would focus on the tourism center around the ocean. I would focus on great universities that are down there, like Stockton College, and every great city like Hoboken up in Hudson County. Part of a great regentrification story is a university much like Stevens up in Hoboken. Use Stockton and its center for hotel management as a destination point that will create interest in the city, restaurants, other avenues that go along with success. And then finally, you have a remarkable healthcare network down there, and I would use healthcare as an economic engine down there. Break the city down in the quarters. It would help rebuild a residential area, and this is something that's very doable. We have tremendous residents that have ties to both Philadelphia and Baltimore that are cities with great turnaround success stories. We should be leaning on their past experience to bring them to the table. And I think that really helps in a long-term plan of what is the future of Atlantic City. Gaming has been, it has been attacked from our borders and has started to take away. We need to start to look at Atlantic City as what the gaming is and the future of gaming in New Jersey and the country, and start to use that as a vehicle to figure out what is the future of Atlantic City, including all the different components of it, like sports wagering, internet gaming, and some of the other pieces that we've done piece by piece. We need to look at it as a whole. But that city has an eminently viable future that needs to be focused on and is doable, but it can't be done with absentee ownership and people leaving the state constantly. You need to roll up your sleeves, dig in, and come up with a long-term plan.
Finally, a couple of political questions. The entire General Assembly is up for election in November. Do you anticipate any seats switching parties?
Well, we hope and grow our majority, so we definitely do see that, and obviously we're going to be aggressive. I think, we hold a 48-32 majority at this point in time. We want to grow that majority. We've done a good job, over the last decade, and I think, our record speaks for itself. We actually been doing a lot of the work of the people, and a lot of the things that the governor takes credit for, it's good legislation that comes out of both houses, that they're democratic issues, and I think we can run on those records that are important to the residents of the state of New Jersey. Our working families and working poor of the state of New Jersey, it's a must that we protect them, and I think we're seeing that, and we look very optimistic to grow our majority.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Majority Leader, thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having me.